James had always been known for his calm and steady presence. From a young age, he dreamed of serving his country, not by fighting in battles, but by protecting those who kept the peace and the traditions alive. Becoming a Royal Guard was more than a job for him. It was a proud honor that connected him to something bigger than himself. Every morning he put on his crisp uniform with great care, the bright red coat and the tall bearskin hat symbolizing discipline, respect, and history. To many people, James looked like a statue, always standing tall, never blinking, and never showing any sign of emotion. His role required him to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes, no chance to show weakness. Standing still for hours outside the palace gates, he had to maintain a serious face and remain alert. Tourists would sometimes try to make him smile or laugh, but James never gave them the satisfaction. For him, being a Royal Guard was about duty, about tradition, and about respect for the history and the people he was protecting. He knew that millions watched him on TV and in photos, and he wanted to represent his country with pride. Behind this calm exterior, however, was a man with a very different story. James grew up in a small town, far away from the grandeur of the palace. His family wasn't rich or famous. They were simple people who worked hard and cared deeply about each other. James was the oldest of three brothers, and from a young age, he felt responsible for looking after his family. His father was a factory worker, and his mother took care of the home and the children. Money was always tight, but they never complained. They taught James about loyalty, respect, and sacrifice, values that stayed with him throughout his life. James's younger brother, Daniel, was especially close to him. The two shared many memories of growing up together, playing in the fields and dreaming about the future. Daniel had always wanted to be a soldier, and James admired his courage. When Daniel joined the army, James was proud but also worried. He knew the dangers his brother might face, especially during times of conflict. The family held on to hope that Daniel would come home safe. But one cold winter evening, everything changed. James received the call that no family wants to hear. Daniel had been killed in action during a mission overseas. The news shattered James's world. He felt a deep, empty pain that would never fully heal. Though he tried to stay strong for his family, the loss stayed with him every day, hidden beneath his Royal Guard uniform. He carried Daniel's memory silently in his heart, and this loss became a part of the man he was. Despite the pain, James continued his work as a Royal Guard. The routine helped him cope, giving him structure and purpose. Every step he took, every moment he stood still, reminded him of discipline and honor, things Daniel had believed in too. But no matter how steady he appeared, there were moments when the weight of grief pressed heavily on him. He kept those feelings locked away, believing that showing them would be a sign of weakness. Outside the palace walls, life went on. Tourists visited, snapping pictures and admiring the Royal Guards as they performed their duties. Children would wave, and some visitors would try to catch a reaction. James, like the others, remained perfectly still. It was as if he was part of the architecture, an unchanging symbol of tradition and strength. But the truth was that behind those eyes so many stories were hidden, stories of hope, sacrifice, and sometimes heartbreak. One day, James received a new assignment that would change everything. He was told he would stand guard at a special ceremony honoring Captain Michael, a war hero who had recently passed away. Captain Michael was known for his bravery, having saved many lives during his service. The ceremony was to take place at a peaceful graveyard dedicated to those who had given their lives for the country. For James, the honor was immense. He felt a deep connection to the event even before it began. The morning of the ceremony arrived cold and clear. James dressed carefully, his uniform crisp and his boots polished to a shine. He arrived early at the graveyard, the fresh earth and fallen leaves creating a quiet, somber atmosphere. Families of fallen soldiers gathered, holding flowers and photographs, faces full of memories and sorrow. Veterans stood tall but tired, their uniforms worn and their eyes reflecting years of experience. James took his place near the grave of Captain Michael. The tall stone monument stood proudly, engraved with the hero's name and a brief story of courage. As James stood silently, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Around him, the crowd was hushed, the air thick with respect and remembrance. The stillness was different here. It was filled with emotion rather than duty. As the ceremony began, speakers talked about Captain Michael's life and the sacrifices he had made. James listened closely, feeling the words touch something deep inside him. He thought of Daniel, the brother he had lost, and of all the young men and women who had given everything. The stories of bravery and loss were no longer just words. They became real and close. People came forward one by one to lay flowers and pay their respects. Among them was a small child holding a single red rose. The child's innocent gesture touched James's heart in a way nothing else had. It reminded him of his own family, of the love and loss that connected them all. For a moment, James felt a rush of emotion welling up inside him, a mixture of pride, sorrow, and gratitude. But James had been trained to control his feelings, to stand strong no matter what. He forced himself to stay steady, to keep his eyes forward, and to keep breathing slowly. Yet beneath the surface, a storm was growing. The quiet grief he had carried for so long began to rise like a tide, threatening to break through the walls he had built around his heart. As the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, James remained in place. The silence around him felt heavier now, filled with memories and emotions he could no longer ignore. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. His chest tightened as tears gathered in his eyes, something that no one had ever seen before. In that moment, James was no longer just a royal guard. He was a man remembering his brother, feeling the pain of loss and honoring the memory of all who had given their lives. The perfect mask he wore for so many years began to crack, revealing the true human being beneath, the one who loved, mourned, and hoped. No one could predict what would come next. But this day, standing at the grave of a hero, marked the beginning of a new chapter in James's life, a story not just of duty and discipline, but of courage in facing the deepest emotions. It was a story that would change how he saw himself and the meaning of true strength. James felt a quiet excitement mixed with a deep sense of responsibility as he prepared for the special ceremony. This was not an ordinary day at his post. Today he would be standing guard at the grave of Captain Michael, a man who had become a symbol of bravery and sacrifice across the country. The honor of guarding such an important event was both humbling and heavy with meaning. Captain Michael was known by many as a true hero. He had served in difficult battles, risking his life to save others, and had earned respect not only from his fellow soldiers, but also from the entire nation. His story was one of courage, leadership, and compassion. For James, who had lost his own brother in war, the ceremony was deeply personal. It was a chance to honor not just Captain Michael, but all those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. The morning air was cool and still when James arrived at the cemetery. The place was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees whose leaves whispered softly in the breeze. Rows of gravestones stood in neat lines, each one marking a life once lived, a story once told. Families and friends of fallen soldiers gathered quietly, holding flowers and photographs. Veterans in their worn uniforms stood with pride and sadness, their eyes telling stories of battles fought and comrades lost. As James took his place near the grave, he looked closely at the stone monument. Captain Michael's name was carved deeply into the granite, along with dates that marked his life and death. There was a small inscription that read, "For those who gave everything, we remember." The words felt powerful, a reminder of the cost of freedom and peace. The ceremony began with the soft sound of a bugle playing a solemn tune. The crowd fell silent, and James stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed ahead. Speeches were made by military leaders and government officials, each one sharing memories of Captain Michael's bravery and the lives he had saved. They spoke of his courage under fire, his kindness to his fellow soldiers, and his unwavering commitment to his country. Listening to these words, James felt a stirring in his heart. He thought of Daniel, his brother, and the young soldiers who never returned home. He thought of the families left behind, holding on to memories and the hope that their loved ones' sacrifices were not forgotten. The ceremony was more than a formal event. It was a moment of connection, a reminder of the human cost behind the medals and honors. People began to come forward one by one to lay flowers at the grave. A woman gently placed a bouquet of white lilies, her eyes shining with tears. An elderly man, a fellow veteran, rested a worn cap on the stone, saluting silently. Then a small child, no older than 6, stepped forward, clutching a single red rose. The child's innocence and simple gesture touched something deep inside James. He saw in that child the future, a future that Captain Michael and so many others had fought to protect. As the ceremony continued, James felt a mix of emotions growing within him. There was pride in being part of such a meaningful moment, sadness for the lives lost, and a deep sense of respect for those gathered. But beneath it all, a quiet pain began to rise, the pain of his own loss, the memory of Daniel's smile, the hope that had once burned bright, and the grief that had never left him. Though trained to remain calm and collected, James found it harder to hold back his feelings. The ceremony stirred memories he had tried to keep buried, and the weight of those memories pressed on his chest. His breath grew a little uneven, and his eyes flickered with emotion he could not fully hide. Around him, the crowd remained respectful and silent, sharing in the collective remembrance. No one spoke loudly or moved suddenly. The atmosphere was one of quiet honor, where each person was allowed to feel their own sorrow and gratitude. As the final moments of the ceremony approached, a military chaplain stepped forward to offer a prayer. His voice was gentle but strong, speaking words of comfort and hope. James closed his eyes briefly, imagining Daniel standing beside him, hearing the prayer, feeling the love from those who remembered him. When the prayer ended, the bugle sounded once more, a final note that echoed across the cemetery. The crowd began to slowly disperse, leaving behind flowers, tears, and memories. James remained for a moment longer, standing by the grave as if reluctant to leave the place where so much meaning was held. It was then that something unexpected happened. James's steady posture faltered slightly, and a single tear escaped down his cheek. His hands trembled just enough to betray the calm he usually kept so well. For the first time in many years, the weight of loss became too much to bear in silence. The child with the red rose returned quietly and placed the flower gently on the ground at James's feet. Their eyes met briefly, and James gave the child a small, grateful nod. It was a simple act, but it meant everything in that moment. It reminded James that he was not alone in his grief, that others understood even without words. Suddenly, James felt a deep release, a letting go of the heavy emotions he had carried for so long. It was not a weakness, but a human moment of connection, of remembering, and of healing. He knew that from this day forward, things would be different. James was escorted quietly away from the graveyard by a senior officer who understood what had happened. There was no judgment, only respect. Behind closed doors, James would later share the story of his brother and the pain he carried. It was the beginning of a journey toward healing and acceptance. The ceremony at Captain Michael's grave was more than a duty for James. It was a powerful reminder of the true cost of service and sacrifice. It showed him that even the strongest among us are shaped by loss, and that there is courage not just in battle, but in facing one's own heart. As James returned to his duties in the days that followed, he carried the memory of the ceremony with him. He was no longer just a royal guard, a symbol of discipline and tradition. He was a man who had opened his heart, who had allowed himself to feel deeply, and who was ready to honor not only the heroes of the past, but also the emotions that make us human. After the ceremony at Captain Michael's grave, James tried to return to his usual routine, but something inside him had changed. The moment he allowed himself to feel the deep sorrow he had kept hidden for so long left a mark he couldn't ignore. For years, he had been the strong, silent protector, the man who stood still and showed no emotion. But now the pain he carried seemed too big to keep inside. Back at the palace, James went through his daily duties with a quiet struggle. His hands, which had always been steady, sometimes trembled when he thought no one was watching. His breath sometimes caught when he remembered the child placing the rose at his feet, and the way the crowd had watched him quietly as his tears fell. He felt exposed, as if the walls he had built around himself were starting to crumble. James wasn't used to showing weakness. The Royal Guard uniform was not just clothes, it was a symbol of discipline, honor, and strength. To break down in front of others felt like breaking that symbol, but deep down he knew he could no longer hide. The loss of his brother and the memories stirred at the graveyard had opened a door he could not close. In the days that followed, James found himself thinking about Daniel constantly. He remembered their childhood games, their shared dreams, and the last time they had spoken before Daniel went to war. The pain of losing him was sharp and fresh, as if no time had passed at all. The quiet moments during his guard duty became times when his mind drifted and his heart ached. James also began to notice something else. When he saw other soldiers and veterans, he felt a new sense of connection. He saw in their faces the same mix of pride and pain, courage and sorrow. He realized that the ceremony had reminded him of a community of people who understood loss in a way few others could. One afternoon, after finishing his shift, James quietly left the palace grounds and walked to a small park nearby. It was a peaceful place where families came to relax and children played. Sitting on a bench, James watched the world go by, trying to gather his thoughts. The bright sunlight and the sound of laughter seemed far away from the heaviness inside him. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was the senior officer who had escorted him away from the graveyard. The officer spoke with a gentle tone, asking James how he was feeling and offering support. For the first time, James found himself opening up about his feelings. He told the officer about his brother, about the ceremony, and about the tears he couldn't stop. The officer listened carefully, then suggested that James speak with a counselor who specialized in helping soldiers and their families deal with loss and trauma. At first, James was hesitant. He had always believed that he should handle his problems on his own, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But the officer's kind words and understanding gave him the courage to try. The next week, James met with the counselor. The room was quiet and warm, a safe place where James could finally speak freely. At first, he found it hard to talk. The memories of Daniel, the grief, and the years of silence made it difficult to express what he felt. But as the sessions continued, James began to see that sharing his story was not weakness but strength. The counselor helped James understand that grief is a natural and important part of healing. She explained that many soldiers and their families carry deep pain, and that talking about it can help release the burden. James learned ways to cope with his emotions, to remember his brother with love instead of only sadness, and to find peace in honoring Daniel's memory. As weeks passed, James noticed a change in himself. He still felt the pain of loss, but it was no longer a weight that crushed him. Instead, it became a quiet presence, a reminder of the love he shared with his brother. He began to smile more often, and the trembles in his hands grew less frequent. At the same time, James started to reach out to others who had experienced similar losses. He joined support groups for veterans and families of fallen soldiers. In these groups, he found friendship and understanding. He listened to stories that mirrored his own and shared his journey of grief and healing. The connections gave him strength and hope. One day, James received an invitation to speak at a small memorial event for fallen soldiers. He was nervous but accepted. Standing before the crowd, he shared his story, not just as a royal guard but as a brother, a man who had learned that showing emotion was a sign of courage, not weakness. His words touched many hearts and helped others feel less alone. At the palace, James's fellow guards noticed the change in him. He was still disciplined and professional, but now there was a warmth in his eyes and a quiet kindness in his presence. They respected him even more for his honesty and bravery in facing his pain. However, not everyone understood. Some saw his breakdown as a moment of weakness that should be forgotten. James faced moments of doubt, wondering if he had done the right thing. But each time he reminded himself that true strength comes from being real, from facing life's hardest moments with courage and honesty. The story of James's breakdown spread quietly among those who knew him. It became a reminder that behind the uniform, every guard, every soldier, and every person carries a story. It taught many that showing emotion is human, and that healing begins when we stop hiding our pain. One afternoon, James visited the graveyard again, this time not as a guard but as a visitor. He stood at Captain Michael's grave and laid a bouquet of wildflowers beside the stone. He whispered a quiet prayer for his brother and all the fallen heroes. In that moment, he felt a sense of peace he had not known for years. James understood that life would never be the same, but that was okay. He had learned to live with his grief, to honor his brother's memory with love and strength. He had discovered that being a royal guard was not just about standing still or looking strong. It was about being human. The journey was far from over, but James was no longer afraid. He had broken through the silence and the mask he wore, and in doing so, he found a new kind of bravery, a bravery rooted in the heart. After the ceremony and his emotional moment at the hero's grave, James found himself in a new and unfamiliar place inside. The feelings he had pushed down for so long were no longer hidden. They were real, loud, and sometimes overwhelming. Though he wanted to go back to his old self, the strong, steady guard who never showed weakness, He realized that something important had shifted. Shortly after the ceremony, James was quietly asked to meet with his commanding officer. The officer did not scold him or show disappointment. Instead, he spoke with kindness and understanding. He told James that what happened at the grave was not a failure, but a moment of deep humanity. The officer said that even the strongest people need support sometimes and that James was not alone. James was relieved but also nervous. For years he had believed he had to handle everything by himself. Now the walls he had built around his feelings were beginning to come down, and he didn't know what would come next. The officer encouraged him to take some time off and speak with someone trained to help people through difficult emotions. At first, James was unsure. Taking time off felt like giving up, and speaking to a counselor seemed strange. But after some thought, he agreed to try. He knew he needed help, even if it was hard to admit. In the quiet room of the counselor's office, James began to share his story. At first, his voice was low and hesitant. The memories of his brother Daniel, the pain of loss, and the pressure of his duties came rushing back. But the counselor listened patiently without judgment. She helped James understand that grief was a natural process and that allowing himself to feel sadness, anger, or confusion was okay. James learned that healing was not about forgetting or moving on quickly. It was about remembering with love and learning to live with the pain in a way that did not control him. Each session helped James feel lighter. He realized that sharing his story was a form of strength, not weakness. Outside the sessions, James began to connect with others who had also lost loved ones in service. He joined support groups made up of veterans, soldiers, and family members who understood his pain. These meetings were filled with quiet conversations, tears, and stories of courage. For the first time in a long while, James felt he belonged somewhere beyond the palace walls. In these groups, James found comfort and friendship. People shared advice on how to cope with difficult days, how to honor their lost loved ones, and how to find hope in dark times. James began to understand that grief was a journey shared by many, not a burden he had to carry alone. One day, James was invited to speak at a memorial event for fallen soldiers. At first, he was scared. Standing in front of a crowd to talk about his emotions was far from his usual role as a royal guard. But he knew this was important. He wanted others to know that it was okay to feel deeply, to cry, and to seek help. When James spoke, he shared not only his grief, but also the strength he found in accepting it. He talked about the day at Captain Michael's grave, the tear he couldn't hold back, and how that moment changed him. His honest words touched many hearts, and the audience listened quietly, some with tears in their eyes. The speech was a turning point for James. It helped him accept that being human was more important than hiding behind a mask. His courage inspired others to speak about their own pain and to support each other. Back at the palace, James's fellow guards noticed the change in him. He was still disciplined and professional, but there was a new warmth in his smile and a kindness in his eyes. Some guards came to him for advice or simply to talk. James welcomed these moments. He knew now that connection was part of strength. However, not everyone understood. Some people thought James's breakdown was a sign of weakness that should be forgotten. He faced moments of doubt and fear, wondering if he was letting others down or damaging his reputation. But James reminded himself that true courage meant facing these fears and continuing forward. James also started small projects to honor fallen soldiers. He helped organize visits to hospitals for wounded veterans and events to support military families. These activities gave him a new purpose and a way to give back. They also helped him build stronger bonds with those who shared similar experiences. As time passed, James found peace in the simple things. He enjoyed quiet walks in the park, reading letters from Daniel's old friends and writing his own thoughts in a journal. He realized that healing was not a straight path, but a series of small steps filled with hope. One afternoon, James returned to the graveyard where the ceremony had taken place. This time, he did not stand guard, but came as a visitor and a brother. He knelt beside Captain Michael's grave and laid fresh flowers. He whispered a quiet prayer for Daniel and all the fallen heroes. The air was calm, and James felt a gentle warmth in his heart, a sign that healing was growing. James understood that his breakdown had been a gift. It forced him to confront pain he had hidden for years and helped him find a new way to live with loss. It showed him that being strong did not mean hiding emotions, but embracing them with courage and compassion. From that day forward, James carried himself differently. He was still a royal guard, proud of his role and his country. But he was also a man who had faced his own brokenness and found strength in healing. He knew that his story, like Captain Michael's and Daniel's, was one of bravery, not just on the battlefield but in the heart. James's journey was far from over, but he no longer feared the road ahead. He was ready to walk it with open eyes and an open heart, honoring the past while living fully in the present. After the emotional journey James had been through, something new began to take shape in his life. He felt lighter, more connected, not just to the memory of his brother Daniel but to the people around him. The experience at Captain Michael's grave, the support he received afterward, and the courage he found inside himself all came together to change how James saw the world and his place in it. Returning to his duties as a royal guard was not the same as before. James still took pride in his work, wearing his uniform with respect and standing tall at his post. But now there was a new purpose behind every step he took. His job was no longer just about discipline or tradition. It was about honoring the stories of those who had sacrificed for the country, including his brother and Captain Michael. One of the most important changes was how James allowed himself to feel. Where once he had hidden his emotions behind a mask, now he embraced them as part of being human. This did not mean he broke down often or lost control. Rather, he found a quiet strength in acknowledging his feelings and using them as motivation to live fully and with compassion. James also became a source of support for others. His experience helped him connect with fellow guards, soldiers, and families who were dealing with loss and grief. He listened with empathy, shared his own story, and encouraged others to seek help when they needed it. His honesty made it easier for others to open up, creating a sense of community and understanding among those who often felt alone. The palace leadership noticed these changes as well. They recognized James's growth and the positive influence he had on his colleagues. His example inspired new programs focused on mental health and emotional support for the guards and soldiers. James was invited to participate in training sessions where he shared his journey and helped others learn how to cope with difficult emotions. Outside of his official duties, James became involved in charitable work. He volunteered with organizations that supported veterans and military families, helping to organize events that celebrated their sacrifices and provided practical assistance. These activities gave him a deeper sense of purpose and connection to the larger community. One particular event touched James deeply. It was a gathering for families of fallen soldiers, where stories were shared and memories honored. James spoke openly about Daniel, the pain of loss, and the healing power of acceptance. His words were met with tears and nods of understanding. For many, his presence was a reminder that grief could be faced with courage and hope. James also took time for personal reflection. He started keeping a journal, writing down his thoughts, memories, and feelings. This practice helped him process his emotions and track his healing journey. Sometimes he wrote letters to Daniel, telling him about his life, his work, and the changes he had made. These letters were private, but they gave James a way to feel close to his brother and keep his memory alive. As the years passed, James's story became one of quiet inspiration. He was invited to speak at schools and community events, sharing the lessons he had learned about strength, vulnerability, and the importance of mental health. His message was clear: it is okay to feel, to seek help, and to find support in others. True bravery is not hiding pain, but facing it with honesty and compassion. James also found time for small joys. He enjoyed walks in nature, listening to music, and spending time with friends and family. He learned to laugh again, to appreciate the simple moments that make life meaningful. These changes did not erase the sadness he felt for Daniel, but they added layers of hope and peace. One day, James was asked to participate in a documentary about royal guards and their lives behind the uniform. He agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to show the world the human side of those who serve. During filming, he spoke openly about his breakdown at the hero's grave, the journey that followed, and the strength he found in healing. His story touched many viewers and helped raise awareness about mental health and grief. The documentary received praise for its honesty and compassion. James was proud that his experience could help others understand the importance of emotional well-being. He hoped that by sharing his story, more people would feel encouraged to speak openly about their struggles and find support. Throughout all these changes, James never forgot the moment that started it all, the day at Captain Michael's grave. That moment of unexpected tears was the beginning of a new life for him. It taught him that strength and vulnerability can exist together, and that true courage means embracing all parts of ourselves. James often visited the graveyard, not as a guard but as a visitor and a brother. Each time he laid flowers, said a prayer, and spent quiet moments remembering. These visits were sacred to him, a place where he could feel close to Daniel and all the heroes who had sacrificed so much. In his heart, James carried the lessons of his journey forward. He knew that life would always have challenges, but he was ready to face them with courage and compassion. His story was not just about a breakdown at a hero's grave. It was about the power of healing, the importance of connection, and the strength found in being truly human. James's life had changed forever, and with that change came hope. Hope that others could find healing too. Hope that no one would have to suffer in silence, and hope that the memories of those who gave everything would always be honored with love.